Well, everyone in this room at some point has wondered, why is it that the air travel industry does things the way that it does things? And you've probably heard some variation of the point, because that's the way we've always done them. And so we've tried to put together a panel to try to shake up that thinking. These companies that are represented on stage are trying to find new solutions and creative workarounds to some common industry problems. And in order to focus the conversation, we're going to be talking about digital natives, as Beth said earlier. The idea is to try to focus about the upcoming generation of customer and sort of pull together some of the threads that were talked about in yesterday's presentations. So we have an esteemed panel here from right to left. We have Carla Medina from Journera. We have Jeff Cleve from Amtrav and CheapAir.com. We have Mario Ferrara Rodriguez from American Airlines. And we have Paul Byrne from OpenJaw, which is owned by TravelSky, who the presentation you just heard earlier from Kevin. So I guess I'd like to open it up with the point that Beth alluded to at the beginning, which is the next generation of digital natives. They're used to making their purchases and buying things in a different way. They've only known a digital experience. And if you think about companies like Airbnb and Etsy, these are e-commerce experiences where they're typically very mobile first, very friendly on mobile. They offer you a lot of ways of getting information about product attributes in a kind of a ready branded format. So does anyone here want to jump in on the topic of how digital natives and flight shopping intersect?
You're going to me first, okay.
Okay, Paul.
I guess I'm on your left. It's an interesting topic, and it was great to actually kind of take a look at it afresh, because it changes very regularly, and there's a wealth of information and studies out there, which is good and bad. Some conflicts, but there are general consistencies kind of across a lot of the surveys that are carried out. In general, the cohort Generation Z, they've lived through a financial crisis, so what seems to be consistent is that they're very financially conservative. And as a result, they're seeking value. So the primary driver in what they're doing is seeking value. They've also, because of their age, kind of lived in a world where, there's global kind of terrorism. So they're very kind of aware of their impact on the environment, on, what humanity is doing to impact that environment. They're also we see this consistently, they're very aware of privacy, and privacy is a big concern. They're the cohort who would most be likely to change their privacy settings, look at the terms and conditions and see, what data is being used for what purposes. And again, they're very strong in the areas of autonomy and control. So being put in control, having control over all stages of the journey, and being not, for example, being booked onto reaccommodated flights, but being given various options. And lastly, I think what I see consistently is they're very experience driven. So, we see this time and time again, and at all the conferences, they talk about experiential activities, culture, kind of events, musical festivals. So, while they're searching for value, they tend to stay longer, and they're seeking out those kind of experiential activities.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned sustainability and the environment, and that would be one thing that I would say at the ATPCO conference has sort of been not mentioned very much, but it's actually probably top of mind for a lot of digital natives. Greta is a 16-year-old star of media of the past few months internationally, trying to bring attention to issues about sustainability. And we heard, some players are trying to do work. Skyscanner, for example, has an eco-conscious option, so you can compare flights based on estimates about the age of the aircraft and the nature of the rights about which one is going to spew less carbon into the atmosphere. And they said that in the past year, about 10 million people have taken advantage of that search. I forget what the number is, a month or a year. But so the rising generation may be interested in some of these other things that aren't part of the typical is it a basic economy seat? Is it a window versus aisle? So there's a lot to unpack there. I'm going to keep bringing back some of those points that you brought up, Paul. Carla, what do you want to weigh in there?
I want to expand on that a little bit further. And it's not just about the product attributes, to your point. It's more about the entire experience, right? So this generation, more than others, have just a depth of information that they can access to make their purchasing decision, whether that's from YouTube or Instagram or other forms of social media. And those platforms really influence what they ultimately purchase. And I think airlines need to be very cognizant of that fact and essentially sell in a way that kind of relates to that emotional attachment with the experience.
That dovetails. So emotional attachment, in the head up before this, when Beth was introducing, she put on the screen the Norwegian Dreamliner and sort of that experience there. Does that sort of resonate for you? Can you imagine any younger relatives, nieces or nephews who might be interested in that?
Oh, for sure. My nieces grew up with iPads, essentially, in their hands since they were very early, and I think that they were just trained to kind of react to information in a way that's more about, okay, this seems really cool and something I want to do because this seems so cool.
Cool. So, Paul, is there anything that at Amtrav and in the broader sector that you play in that I know you do both B2B and B2C, but on the B2B side first, is there anything that you see that the industry has to catch up on in terms of appealing to this next generation?
Yeah, I think we've been spoiled by the fact that so many of the travel buyers really still remember paper tickets. So just the idea that they could order a ticket online is still cool for some of them. But I mean, we're way past the point where we can get by on just offering the ability to book tickets online. And I think that, I mean, we've got a lot of work to do. I think that whether it's consumer or corporate, people want to know what they're getting. And it's so hard now to really get a clear picture of all the options, what's included. Even sites that have pictures, you know, sometimes you see a picture of like the brand new Airbus with the, you know, interior that came out yesterday, but then you get on the plane and it's an MD-80 that was, you know, hasn't been, you know, refurbished in 20 years. I mean, I would love to be able to buy an airline ticket the same way I buy a ticket to a Dodger game, where I go on StubHub, I see the map of the stadium, I see the price of every seat, I could click in to see a view of that seat. That's where we need to get to. We're a long ways from that, obviously. I mean, we still live in this world where the booking and the ticket and the seat assignment, they're all completely separate, like, constructs, and, you know, with surprisingly disconnected. So it's really difficult to try to bring the kind of retail experience to life that digital natives especially are used to seeing with everything else that they buy. But hopefully we'll get there.
So I'd just like to build on that for a second, Paul. So you also have cheapair.com, so it's a B2C facing.
Jeff, by the way.
Jeff, sorry. And that project, you built it out of your college. You had a previous version, which was an 800 number back when that was important, but you built this out of as an entrepreneurial young person. So how long do you think it would take for like CheapAir to be able to have the pictorial aspect? So we heard yesterday on a panel from executives from Skyscanner and from Google that said that in their experiments, pictures helped boost conversion, turned shoppers into bookers. How long do you think it would take to get what you're talking about, the Dodgers example, to get the imagery onto sites like yours?
I mean, there's a lot of complexity that goes in there, and realistically, it's going to have to be incremental and not, you know, we're not just going to be able to say next week, okay, we have the perfect shopping experience. I mean, we've prided ourselves on doing a lot of trying to build a lot of NDC capabilities without NDC, like trying to curate all this data ourselves and be able to show pictures and be able to show attributes, but it's hard. There isn't a central source. I mean, I think Route Happy has been the best thing that's happened to this effort, and I definitely appreciate everything that they've done. But it's still, I mean, you have there's so much complexity, and there's so many different There's no consistency among airline fleets. And then you have, code sharing. Like you have an airline like Delta that has done a masterful job of building a fantastic brand, and yet they will slap their code on 5, 10 different other airlines. I mean, if you go to apple.com, you're not going to see a Motorola phone with an Apple brand and a little tiny built by Motorola disclaimer. So I think there's so much confusion among air shoppers that not really knowing what they're going to get. I mean, you have like a $180 fare and it'll say it's changeable for a $200 penalty. All these little things we have to find a way to work out and just make it really clear. No one wants to read with all due respect to our host here, the 3 pages of ATP Co rules on what happens if they want to change their ticket. Mm-hmm. So we got a lot of work to do, but I think we've made a lot of progress in the last year, and I think the next year we're going to see a lot more.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. So Mario, do you have some views you want on how flight shopping can evolve for Gen Z?
Yeah, for sure. So, I think Gen Z is a generation that prides themselves on being unique and being individuals rather than, part of a big crowd that's identified by X or Y characteristic. And something that we can do is present the correct offers to them personally. And so using their past travel data, their search information to cater offers that are relevant to them personally, I think is what we need to aim for in the airline industry. And, I think about scrolling through Instagram or Facebook or any social media, and I get, so many ads now, and I think, oh, well, here, another ad, this is annoying, and then I'm like, wait, what? Is that 10% off my favorite store? Like, oh, okay, I'm okay with this ad. And so I think it's not about, having a million options out there and having them be able to choose, which is a part of it, but more importantly, I think it's knowing which options to offer them so that they can cater their own travel experience to the best of, whatever fits their needs.
Cool. Yeah. Just for a second, Paul, I would like to build on that. So Mario, you're at American Airlines, you're in the revenue management team, and recently we were talking about before we came on stage that you've now created a new group there, and that kind of relates to the conversation. So
yeah, so I head up a team that's called the Delivery Strategy Team, and we do display optimization for our fares and our products online. So we work with third-party channels and with our own direct channel to make sure that the way that we're communicating offers is optimal, is not only best for the airline and for selling what we intend to sell, but also that we can clearly communicate what our product is, what one fare brand is over another one, and so our customers also know what they're getting when they're purchasing a ticket.
Thank you, Mario.
Yeah, I was just going to say I agree with that. Fairly from a tech perspective, very much. Your consumers are going to interact with you in a variety of channels, and what's very important is to be in the channel they're in, and to have a consistency in that channel. And depending on how they interact with you, Jeff on one channel, might be J. Whatever, an email on another channel. So there's a whole identity resolution issue to try and determine that Jeff is actually Jeff. And knowing who Jeff is then gives you the ability to deliver personalized offers, to any channel in which he decides or she decides to interact with you on. So, delivering irrelevant offers is probably the single most, the single biggest factor that'll drive like a Gen Z, cohort away from you. They're the cohort that will disregard like mass content that's not personalized.
And I imagine in the mobile setting, it's even more of a challenge to try to make the content relevant. For Carla at Journera, so Journera doesn't just look at the airlines, you also look at other sectors of the industry. Is there anything that you are seeing there from how other sectors are trying to play in Gen Z and how it relates to this conversation?
Yeah, one thing that all of them are keyed in on is personalization, right? So there was a study by Google that questioned Gen Z, what makes you think a product is interesting or cool? And the first answer, the highest answer was that their friends talked about it. The second one was that they'd seen an ad for it. And then the third was that the product seemed personalized to them, right? And there's this overarching question of like, what's that fine balance between being creepy and being relevant. And I think what you're finding with Gen Z is that although they care about privacy, they actually care about the benefit to them a little bit more. So you can be hyper relevant as long as it's beneficial. They can see a clear benefit to them. And we see that across hotels, especially rideshare, right? So getting to, they automatically populate where they think you're gonna go, and I don't find that creepy. So I think that they're all moving at different speeds, but I think there's definitely a place for everybody.
One point, so Skift Research recently did a report on Gen Z behaviors, and one of the survey results we found when we interviewed people in China and India was that more than 70%, it is a top factor of consideration for them about being able, when they're choosing what kind of trip they want for a leisure experience, how that will translate into being able to share it socially on their favorite social networks, which was much higher than in countries elsewhere in the world, and because Asia sort of is leading in a lot of these trends, and you have a very high rising set of digital natives, even more there than in the West, and from a certain perspective, that may sort of lead. So for OpenJaw, it's been focused on mobile for a long time. Is there anything in terms of like the mobile aspect that you think is relevant to bringing up?
Yeah, I mean, Gen Z are obviously very kind of high users of smartphones, and one of the studies, I think the Expedia study on Gen Z, they found that 50% of a large 10,000 user study spent more than 5 hours kind of on their smartphone a day, which I found hard to believe initially, but when I looked at my own kids, I mean, their smartphone, they're 3 Gen Z boys, and they're on their phone constantly. But there's many things you can do kind of on the smartphone side. The social media channels they use are primarily Instagram, as opposed to millennials who kind of tend to use WhatsApp and Facebook. They do use their social circles and Instagram to as a source of inspiration for travel. So being on Instagram, being on social media is important. Pushing kind of updates, I guess, is very important, because in the spirit of kind of giving them control and keeping them aware and informed, pushing out kind of gate changes, sched changes, any kind of notifications kind of would engender loyalty. And again, kind of sticking on the smartphone kind of theme, I mean, what's really important is staying connected. So from an airline perspective, I mean, you would tend to think that delivering kind of a good in-flight Wi-Fi service where they can stream, where they can socially interact, shop if they want, would engender loyalty, because they're not kind of very favorable towards traditional frequent flyer. Kind of it's more the transactional kind of a loyalty. So if you deliver value, if you deliver what they're looking for, they'll remain loyal to you.
Okay. The clock has been saying so many different things to me, but I believe we're going to end now. But would anyone, Carla or Muriel or Jeff, would you have anything else that you'd like to add?
Well, one thing I want to say is that, I mean, in addition to all this stuff that this new generation wants, it also has to be really quick. Everything has to come back in less than a second, or people aren't happy. Like, we can't get away with 10-second response times anymore.
I think that's an excellent point on speed.
Yeah, and I'd like to add really quick that this is still a very, very young generation. They're just now entering the workforce. And so although we have all of this information ready and we have all these surveys and research, it'll be important to keep an open mind and to listen to them as they enter the workforce and as they start traveling more. Just keep an open mind and listen to what they want and they tell us.
Excellent, excellent.
And I can't stress enough the importance of remembering that there's an overall experience attached to their travel, and that they look at things more holistically because they want these unique experiences that they can share with their friends.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us in this conversation. I really enjoyed it. But please give a round of applause to the panelists.